Welcome back. We got a show for you today. It's an audio and a video. So this will be a tutorial on the Tascam Model 24. And we'll go into detail about what kind of things you can do with it, what exactly it's capable of doing, and just overall go over all the different things that make it click. And I just want to remind everybody that this is pretty much a show that's based off of my opinion. It's an opinion-based show, so everything that I'm doing, just take it with a grain of salt. A lot of it's my opinion. This is just the way that I do it. So if you do it a different way, or you get something out of it and you happen to find it interesting or at least entertaining, then that's good. So yeah, so like I said, the Model 24 from Tascam, it's by far one of the my favorites of all my gear that I have. To be completely honest, this thing has taken a lot of my work to different levels, great and beyond. I can't stress it enough. I really do enjoy this mixer, and the Tascam Model 24 is it's quite a big mixer. So to be completely honest about it, this is one of the larger mixers that you might want to invest in if you have maybe a lot of different types of instruments you want to plug in. But overall, it's in size is relatively large compared to most mixers. So to keep that in mind, or keep it in perspective, that not everybody this will be the best solution for, depending on what kind of studio you have, or how much room you have on your desk, or where you want to mount it, or whatever. It can be a big one. So so just keep that in mind. Yeah. So the thing that I do enjoy about it, though, even though it's maybe overkill for some people, is that it has so many features and so many things that you just continue to keep discovering. And even though if you think that you may or may not understand something about it, give it time. The more and more that I look into it, and the more and more that I start using physically all these different things on the board, I do learn more and more all the time. And there are little ways to bypass and do little tricks and stuff that will help you further on down the road when it comes to getting creative, when it comes to mixing things properly, or whether you're just trying to do maybe a live stream or something, and you can't quite figure out what's how to get it to work the proper way. But this thing is capable of doing pretty much anything. So whether it be through the USB, or whether you do it pretty much just all live on the board itself, this thing is capable of doing a lot of different things. And so basically what I want to do with these tutorials is just go through, we'll start with the basics, I guess, and we'll just go through and just kind of explain what the board has and what kind of different things you can do with it. So we'll basically talk about each individual track. We'll go through and discuss what all these little knobs are for. We'll talk about ways of connecting things. We'll talk about the do's and don'ts of actually having this board. So these are all the different things that we'll talk about and we'll explore. So if you're into this board, I would definitely say that it's something that I do recommend. If you're into having, multitude of mixing channels, or just the variety of things that are on here, it just has pretty much everything that you need. And not to mention, for the price, it's relatively priced in a good area compared to most mixers that are in its league. And it doesn't lack quality either. So the one thing I do enjoy about the Tascam is that it's got a lot of good quality features. And so the board itself is in my opinion, very, very good quality, I guess. So without further ado, I guess we'll just go with it and we'll talk about this. This will be kind of I did a Tascam kind of like a tutorial on how to do live streaming and set up live streaming through like FL Studios and stuff. So this will just be a continuation. We'll just go through and we'll, I guess we'll start from here. So you have 24 channels, and physically there are 22 on this board. So if you start from the beginning here, 1, and you end up over here, 22. 23 and 24 are actually built into the mixer. So those are going to be like your stereo main, main 2 tracks that this like dumbed down to a stereo track. So that's why they call it a 24 channel mixer. And not to mention, there's also stereo channels too. So that's also a nice handy feature to have if you're, into recording things in stereo. You have, let's see here, 4 stereo channels. You also have a Bluetooth, which is also stereo. You have also RCA. You also have a 1/8 inch jack stereo for like things like iPads or your phone that actually still have the actual little connectivity plug or whatever you call it, input on the phone, or anything that has that input you can actually plug in there. And if you notice, each one of these channels has obviously got a mic input. So every single channel is equipped with a mic input. So you can actually plug in quite a few microphones on this thing. So if you're doing like a show that requires a lot of microphones, you have a lot of those ports. You also then have a 1/4 inch TS or TRS. I always get the terminology a little backwards. So TRS. And TRS, I'll show you what a TRS cable looks like here. A TRS cable is like a 1/4 inch, basically like a jack or an input. And these, they come in multitudes of different types. There's ones that are in stereo and ones that are in mono. This one right here is a mono. And the way that they explain this is TRS stands for the tip, the ring, and the sleeve. So, and I'm totally off the camera. Okay, the tip, the ring, and the sleeve right there. So that's the basics of it. And these are obviously, your instruments or your synthesizers or whatever that's self-powered, that's a balanced line. So, and those would obviously input directly into your mixer, just like that. So if you're using, like, let's say a Sub 37, which this one right here is, that would be a mono input that would go into one of your line inputs here. And it would look like this. Okay, now, not to be confused, they actually do say this in the book, not to do this, which would be plugging 2 inputs, a 1/4 inch, and a mic in at once. It doesn't work that way. So it's not like you can just double up these and make, instead of a 24 track mixer, a 48 or something like that. You can't put 2 inputs in one. Okay, unless you're using like the stereo channel over here, like I mentioned. And if you're using stereo, the stereo mixes down automatically here, and then it, obviously travels down to the end right here. It's going to be only a mixer in stereo. You can obviously pan it left and right, but it'll still be in stereo. And obviously anything that's a microphone is going to be a mono input as well. Okay, and if you notice here on the very top, the very first 2 channels have a thing called an insert. There's an insert 1 and 2, which is pretty much the only 2 channels on here that has this. Now, I haven't done a ton of research on inserts, but I do have enough to know exactly what they are used for. And we will go into detail about this. I actually have a cable right here that I'll talk to you about it, and I'll give you like a little example. But the very first 2 inputs also have what they call an instrument plug in. So not only is it a line, but it's also good for instruments such as like an electric guitar or a bass guitar or anything that isn't really self-powered itself. And this requires the use of an instrument button, which is right here. And that button has to be engaged in order to use it. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear the instrument properly. It kind of gives it like a little bit of a boost. So the very first 2 channels here. Normally, I mean, this particular mixer only has a couple of them. There are mixers out there that have multitudes of like, these inputs here and also insert cables. But I think it's maybe something that they're phasing, potentially. I don't know. I don't know enough about the history about these mixers to really know why they don't come with, a lot of them anymore. But maybe just because people don't use them quite as often and they want to put more features into some of the other things that they're doing here. But that's just a little friendly note here that if you do want to plug in a guitar, you definitely could. And that might work out for some people. But as for me, I typically don't work with guitars too much. If anything, I would always record something through a microphone or something like that. But besides that, all these are just mono inputs right here. So you have mono inputs all the way from 1 to, let me see here, 1 to 12. So 1 and 12, those are all mono inputs. So every one of these, whether it's a microphone or an instrument or a line in, is all going to be in mono. Okay. And so these are all individually what they call tracks. So every one of these has its own individual track. And we'll go down and we'll talk about what each one of these represent. Okay, so line, or I guess I could say track 1 here. Nothing's plugged in right now, but the reason why I don't plug in 1 and 2 is because when you're mapping your audio, especially when you're plugged into your computer, you do need these first 2 channels to basically render audio back to your mixer from your computer. Now, this is strictly only within the USB mode. Now, when you're plugged in USB mode and you're using this as an audio interface, this is going to be your left and your right channels. So I actually labeled these left and right channels. So it's basically like your main, not necessarily out, but your main monitor. So anything that's happening in your computer is going to be monitored on 1 and 2. And I also hard left and hard right pan both of these, just so that way they are in true stereo. Now, the one thing is that if you notice, they do have the balance knobs here. Now, if you're working with a mono input, unless you have it specifically panned to a left or a right, it's still going to be somewhere, obviously maybe pan a little bit to the right or pan a little bit to the left, but it won't be a true left or right signal. So if you wanted to have, let's say, like, for instance, these two are Mother 32s. If I wanted a Mother 32 on the left and one on the right to create like a stereo effect, a true stereo effect, you would have to pan 1 left and 1 right. This would be specifically only on the left and one that's specifically only on the right. If it's right here, you'll hear it still in both headphones, but just a majority to the left. So that was just something they explained in the actual manual, that unless you want true stereo, they have to be panned 100% all the way which direction you want. And like I said, that's like if you want to create stereo channels with these mono inputs here. Now, if you already have a stereo input or a stereo like instrument, then you can use these. And these are especially handy because you don't have to really deal with any of that, but you do lose a feature of having a compressor on it. So there's no compression on it. And, depending on whether or not you're going to use it as an audio interface, it's not necessary that you really need it, because you can then go into your DAW and you can also put, as many effects or compressors and things like that on it as much as you want, obviously, depending on how powerful your computer is. But one thing I forgot to mention too is that they do recommend with this mixer that you unplug it when you don't use it for long periods of time, because the switch in the back isn't necessarily going to turn the voltage completely off. It basically puts it in like a standby mode. So whenever you turn your mixer off from the back, it puts it like in a standby. And this doesn't mean that it's actually still like powering everything. It just means that it's using a slight voltage to stay in like a standby mode. And so whether that affects the longevity of the actual board or whether it has anything to do with it, I highly doubt that it's going to really make it like the lifespan of it shorter. But good practice is always key, especially when using gear like this. If you want it to last in the long run, you want to keep it for years and years to come and keep it in good condition, I would always recommend to get a power protector or power surge protector. And every time you turn it off, you can always just go down to your surge and just flip the switch. And that way 100% there's no voltage going to it. And they recommend this, especially if you, for instance, like let's say you don't go to your studio too often and you just frequently visit once in a while, then you can actually power down the whole unit 100%, and then you don't have to worry about it with the surge. You just flip that switch, because they actually recommend unplugging the unit every time, and to do that would also cause wear and tear on the plugs. So I wouldn't recommend unplugging it, but just get a nice surge protector, and then just every time you're done with it, just turn it off at the bottom. Once it's in standby, don't power it off and on with just the surge protector. But obviously you want to have good practices with that. And not to mention, when powering on and off the unit, you want to make sure that your volumes, or for instance, if I show you here, I have a lot of my tracks muted already. So anytime I turn on and off this mixer, I'm not sending any kind of volume or voltage into the mixer when I turn the switch on, because if you have speakers, if you have like, for instance, like a PA system or, monitors or whatever, every time you turn it on, it could send a slight voltage into your audio equipment. And that could potentially maybe maybe down the road, maybe cause some issues or something. They also say it's a good practice, so that way you don't end up having like some sort of feedback. It hurts your ears or something like that. That would also be kind of detrimental if you're wearing a pair of headphones and somehow there's a feedback loop happening, and you get that sound in your ears and the volume's really loud or something like that, and it could damage your headphones or even your own ears for that matter. So that's always just good practice to know. Okay, so yeah. Coming back to this. Okay, so again, we already mentioned that there's 22 tracks here, physical tracks that you can actually manipulate. They all include a gain knob. Now, when it comes to looking at the mixer here, these are not your volume controls. This is not your volume. This is just fading in and out whatever's coming through your mixer. So in good practice, and we'll use this term, I guess, it's always proper to gain your instruments or gain your microphones properly. Now, in most cases, you might not even have to gain any of this stuff over here, since you have volume control on your Mother 32s or your, whatever you got, depending on what kind of synthesizer or what kind of instrument you have. They typically have their own power, their own amplifier. You can control that kind of in its own general, way. But when it comes to microphones don't really have that. And not only that, they have to have power from the board as well in order to operate, especially if they're dynamic, or even like a condenser microphone requires phantom power for that instance. So you also want to make sure that instead of like leaving this all the way, at -10, if that's, let me see here, or I'm sorry. Yeah, actually it's -10. Instead of leaving it all the way down and cranking this sucker up down here and cranking this up and wondering why you can't hear anything, it's because you haven't properly turned the volume up on your instrument. And this is basically your volume knob. They call it a gain. And you can see right here on my microphone, my RE320 I'm talking into, you can see this light lighting up right there. And that light indicates that there's signal coming through, proper signal, in fact. So every time that light comes on, it's almost like telling you that there's signal coming through. And of course you have a low cut right here too. So if you want to cut even more frequency off, it sounds a little more different now. And basically when you're using this mixer as an audio interface, the only portion of this mixer that you really need to keep in key or keep in mind here is this general area up to this little white label here. Okay, because the rest of this doesn't compute with the rest of your workflow when you're using it as a audio interface. This is strictly only for like live use. Okay, obviously I have this muted right now, so none of this is coming into effect on my in FL Studios. Not to mention they're also in what they call PC mode. And there's 3 different modes. So that would be the next thing we're going to talk about. So PC mode is strictly, basically you're only going to monitor it when it's in like a DAW, or whether you're just listening to, like, let's say a song in Windows Media Player, that would be the PC mode. If you're listening into live, all right, the live mode is going to, you can obviously still hear me. It's not necessary that you have to have it in PC mode. It's just when you have it in live mode, you can also monitor it in a live environment. So basically, to put it in perspective, it basically mutes, when you go into PC mode, it mutes all live monitoring as if you were to use this, without a computer. But with live, and you are connected to like a computer or something, as soon as I unmute this, now everything's going to come through. I'll actually hear myself like in a doubled manner, in a sense. So we always want to make sure that when we're in like computer mode or PC mode, that we're monitoring ourselves through like FL Studios, in like FL Studios or something with our mixer here. So this is like my FL Studios mixing setup that I have in here. I actually have inputs for everything in my workflow, such as my physical instruments and whenever I add virtual instruments too. So, but yeah, so this is basically saying that we're in the PC environment. So nothing that we're actually sending information here isn't coming down here yet. Okay, when it's flipped, now we're coming down here. Even though it's still muted, we're still, basically it opens up like a floodgate that then lets information come down all the way down here. And so, like I mentioned, I can even have these muted. I can move these up and down. It doesn't affect anything in my DAW. So that's completely, it doesn't matter up until this point. As long as you're in PC mode, this is just straight up like as a audio interface with 22 inputs. Okay. And when you're in live mode, you also have a built-in compression or a compressor. This could be handy for, obviously, microphones. Maybe if you wanted to add compression to drums or something like that. Anything typically that's like recorded with microphone compression sometimes can help. And obviously you have your EQ. So you have, your highs, your mids, and your lows. And these are all done on measurements of hertz. So if you take a look here, this one here, it goes from -15 to +15. All right, and that's on the high end. These two are mids. I think this top one here is more of like it's a higher mid frequency, and this is like the lower mid frequencies, which is kind of interesting, that you have the two of these. Normally on most mixers, it's just, the high, mid, and low. You necessarily don't have two of these as far as I know. So this mixer actually includes that. And then from here, so this is basically all your compression, all your EQ. From here, you have 3 extra, and I would almost consider them outputs, okay? Because you can use these for a multitude of things. And a little trick that I actually use it for is that back in the day, you would have a Y cable, specifically like this one, okay? And most like musicians, the way they would use this is if you had like, let's say, an effect like this distortion pedal here. Okay, how do you get this into your recording? Okay, how exactly do you get, let's say for instance, you just want it on like the first instrument here. Okay, like on track 1 right here. The way they used to do it is if you take a look, there is an insert cable here, or an insert it's for effects and compression and all kinds of different, things that you might want to modify the sound that you're getting from, the instrument or whatever. So basically the way this is routed is you would have a cable like this. You'd have a stereo end and basically a stereo line TRS cable. All right. And you can tell this is stereo because the tip right here is a little bit different than this one. This is a mono, this is a stereo. And you would have a cable just like this, a cable that would be similar to this with a Y connection in the middle. And the insert would go, the stereo insert would go in here. All right. And then let's say your actual instrument would go right here. So sound from the instrument would go into here, basically get routed back out of here when this is plugged in. It would basically route right back out of here into these guys. And these guys would act as like a split in the connection. So if you're looking at like this distortion pedal, all right, now determining whether or not which one is input and output, you would have to, I forget exactly which one is the input and output, but you'll figure it out as soon as you start plugging things in. I'm sure you'll find out. But you would take the input, and then you would run the output right here, and then this would be like your effects. Okay, so you would take the sound coming out of your instrument. It would go into the insert, which would come out of this cable here, split. Okay, it would come through the input, back out the output, go back into the insert, and then it would follow the chain down, the mixer or whatever here. So that's basically how that works. And they did this with like compression. They did this with like, obviously you could use a pedal if you wanted to. Any kind of effects or whatever. But, all right, this is where it kind of gets creative. So let's say you just want to not deal with all that. Okay, you have these auxiliary in, or actually it's a monitor 1, a monitor 2, and an FX channel, which by the way, this mixer actually includes its own effect, like panel here. And this effect panel, it's actually listed right here, digital effect processor. When it's enabled, you can actually choose from 16 different types of, like, it's like reverb and like a studio sound, a live sound, delays, ping pong chorus effect. You can add those simply by just turning up an FX channel. And as long as you're sending it to, you have to make sure you're sending FX to the FX channel. So this would be like your main knob, how much FX that you want to send, and then which channel you're going to send it to. So you would find out, okay, this is my microphone. I wanted to send this FX to this channel, and this gets sent to a master channel. That's just like an FX master channel. That would just be sent to its like own dedicated stereo FX channel. Okay. Now that's handy. It's very handy, especially if you wanted to send effects to the monitor 1 and 2. But if you're not familiar with monitors, normally when you see the guys up on stage and they're playing like a band or something like that, they have these big speakers laying on the ground in front of them so they can monitor what they're actually playing. Otherwise, if everything's just going out to the audience, you wouldn't hear yourself play or whatever. Now, this is a multitude of like different ways you could do it. You could be wearing just like, earbuds or something that has like a monitor signal sent out. Now, typically, if you think about this, there's a monitor 1 and a monitor 2. So technically you have like 2 channels. You can actually kind of make that into a stereo. Okay. So what I use it for is that I have the monitor channels, which are up here. There's a monitor 1 and 2. If you can't see that. This is the monitor 2 and this is monitor 1 that goes out of my board. So this is an output. Okay. And whichever one of these I turn up on any channel, this gets sent out. Okay. So for instance, if I'm sending out information from my microphone, okay, this monitor 2 and monitor 1, this gets sent out to anything that I want it to. And the one I have it sent out to right now is my big Sky Reverb. So this effects pedal over there, this big Sky Reverb has monitor 1 and 2 into this unit, and then I take the outs of the big Sky, okay, and I routed them to its own dedicated stereo channel, which is right here. So this is my big Sky Reverb, and this is like one of the things that it kind of blew my mind when I first kind of figured it out, and I was like, yeah, that's right. You could take outputs from the mixer, mix them out to any kind of stereo, reverb, doesn't matter, any kind of effect, and then mix it back down to a stereo channel in your mixer, and then so any instrument that's on here, okay, any instrument from, all these guys, I can then add reverb. So if I wanted to add reverb to this one, reverb to that one, that's all within reach. Now this could be used for a multitude of things. It doesn't have to just be used for, reverb or effects or whatever, but this is like the easiest way that I found out how to do it. And that's what I use these particular channels for. So these are very handy. These are actually very, very handy. Right here. These are incredibly handy to have. So just think of them as 3 extra channels. There's even one for the FX. And that's up here. There's an FX. I don't know if you can really see that, but there's an FX output here too, right next to the monitor 1 and monitor 2. And this would be the FX one right here. It's the third one. So monitor 1, monitor 2, and FX. Yeah, so like I said, just think of those as like 3 extra outputs that you can send to anything. Now, the way you use this FX knob, if you don't want to use the input here, you have to make sure that you disable the digital effect processor that's on this, and then it basically adds, you could just use it as like another output. So that's kind of a handy little thing to actually, figure out and use for your advantage. So I always thought that there's got to be a way to do this, and I found out that it's right here. That's basically the easiest way to do it in simple terms, okay? In simple terms of just doing it live. Okay. Now, all this, like I said, makes no difference if you're just using these as an audio interface, though. So if I'm just like I normally use FL Studios, I'm only using this portion of the mixer for the most part of it. Now, if I happen to just, feel lucky and I wanted to just live everything and do a show on this SD card or something, then that's definitely an option. Now, everything can be then controlled through this Tascam monitor here. It's like a little display port. It shows your inputs and outputs. It even has you can actually see and monitor your input, your output, PC return, all that stuff. And that actually goes into some even deeper stuff, because you can actually then return tracks back from your DAW back to these, okay? And as long as you go into your mixer settings and send an output back out to this. Now you probably won't actually hear it in your DAW. You'll probably hear it here. So that's just some additional stuff. It probably goes even deeper than what we're going to do, but yeah, so these are pretty universal. Everything on here is fairly universal. And that's very nice. It's very handy. So, and continuing down on, obviously you have your pan left and right. Now, as for pan left and right, again, since I'm using this as an audio interface, it doesn't affect anything on here. This would be handy if you wanted to, like, for instance, have like one instrument going this way. So I actually have my Korg, if I'm in live mode, it's more centered to the right. If I wanted to, I can, pan a 32 that way or a 32 this way. And it just kind of gives it a stereo effect. And that's all, creativity and what you want to do with it. So that's your pan knob, obviously. And each channel's got their own pan knob. Now, if it's a stereo channel, it's obviously going to favor more the left or the right, in stereo, I guess. I'm even wondering if that's, even really worth messing with if you already have stereo. But yeah, it's still there. And the one thing about the stereo inputs don't have a compressor, first off, and they don't have the double mid-range adjustments. So again, this would be more like your traditional high, mid, and low. So they lack the second mid tuning, and they just have a high, mid, and low, no compression. And then for Bluetooth, it's even more dumbed down. So this is ultimately handy if, like, for instance, you have your phone and it has Bluetooth support and you just wanted to play like a song off your phone, and then it just was going to mix in with like whatever you're doing. Maybe you're practicing or something like that, and then you just want to have a back track for something you're practicing, and then your instruments obviously you'll monitor those, and then you'll monitor what's your backtrack or whatever you might call it. And ultimately, this is paired in with the same channel as like the 1/8 inch jack, which would be roughly like your traditional like headphone jack. That would, right above Bluetooth, they have a stereo input for that. So you get one of those as well on the Bluetooth channel. Now, if you don't want to use Bluetooth and you don't care about it, there's a mute switch here that allows Bluetooth not to get, to come through. And keep in mind too, if you have your phone connected to your mixer, and this is just something that I've, it's personal experience with, if your Bluetooth is connected and you get a phone call, you'll hear, even if your phone's on silent, you'll hear a code, like a thing going through. And so if you're doing something and that bothers you, make sure you mute your Bluetooth, because it'll come through. Even if this down here is muted, even if your main track is muted, because if you're like I said, if you're in your DAW and this is coming through and this is one of your inputs, you'll receive that, and it could potentially, like, I don't know, throw you off or something. So, and then above that, even higher above that, there's like an RCA left and right. It's like the yellow and red input, like something like on a, like, an old stereo might have, something from like a home theater or something like that. So those are basically, in a rough way, all your inputs. And like I said, 1 through 12 are all mono, 12 through 22 are stereo. And then basically everything has like a PC return stereo 23 and 24, which is like a digital one. They don't really tell you that, obviously, looking at the board. So to keep in mind, 23 and 24 are like digital inputs coming from your computer. But then again, you have to monitor them on track 1 and 2. It's just by default, 1 and 2 are your left and your right, like, monitor things. It gets sent back to 1 and 2. So besides that, there's a mute button. Obviously, we've been playing with that throughout this video. So you can mute the track. And like I said, these are the faders. It's not your volume control. Again, volume is the gain knob up here. That's your volume. It even shows up here where it's at 0. And this microphone is set at 0 because I actually have a amplifier on this microphone. So most dynamic microphones will require you to gain them quite more. I don't necessarily have to do that because this microphone has a what is it called? It's that blue something box or something. I could find out. Cloud lifter. It's a cloud lifter, and that actually adds voltage because what we didn't talk about earlier was the phantom power. There's a phantom power right next to the EQ. There's a little EQ thing here, which I don't use, but phantom power is located just to the right of that. And with phantom power, you want to be a little careful with it. Phantom power with most dynamic microphones will not really affect your microphone, but if your microphone doesn't support certain voltages, whether it's like, you know, a microphone that maybe is a little on the cheaper side, it could potentially damage your microphone. Now see, I'm using a cloud lifter. The cloud lifter actually has a processing, like a power process, I don't know what you call, fuse of some sort, that actually takes the extra plus 48 volts and then converts that, you know, down to this. So, but yeah, you don't want to use phantom power on dynamic microphones for the most part of it. Now, phantom power is also good for powering condenser microphones, which is necessary. You have to have phantom power. You have to have an extra 48 volts to power the circuitry that's in a condenser microphone. So this microphone, which I don't have on right now, is actually a condenser. It's an NT1, a Rode NT1, and you'll need that extra power. So this board comes with phantom power, and phantom power is only, I believe, on the first 12 mono channels. So powers 1 through 12, I believe, unless it's like 1 through, yeah, it's got to be. So, and the one thing that I kind of wish that Tascam did was have like an individual button for which microphones you want to add phantom power. That would probably just kind of like simplify things, because if you accidentally plugged in something, you know, and you forgot, you know, it's like maybe a dynamic like SM57 or something like that, and whether or not it can handle the extra volts, who knows, and then you could potentially damage your microphone. Who knows? But I never had a problem doing that. It's just a theoretical thing maybe, but there's probably people that have had damaged, or a ribbon microphone, from what I hear, cannot handle 48 volts. It'll damage it. It'll actually break the ribbon or something. So just make sure you check before you start plugging things in, and make sure that you have your plugs firmly plugged into your mixer before you turn on the mixer. It's just good practice. And you don't want to unplug and plug them while the unit is on as well, because that can it could potentially cause like a voltage spike, and that could then translate to your outputs. And, you know, again, it's just good practice not to do it. You never know. So yeah. And so we were talking about the faders here, the mute button. There's even a little recording button here. If you can see it blinking, I can turn a couple of them on. These are for using the built-in SD card that you can actually multi-track with. So you can actually multi-track all these mixers in live mode and choose which tracks you want to record. And then you hit record here, and then basically, as if like in real time, those tracks then get recorded all together, you know, individually, and then also on one stereo track as well. So that way you have an actual master and you have individual tracks. So, and then right below the fader, there's actually 3 very, very important buttons. And this is probably, well, I said this is like, you know, the most important thing for audio interface, but you also use these down here as well. Okay, for a multitude of things. Okay, if you want to send your audio out to the main, which the main would obviously be, you know, your main slider here. And then it would also be your control room and your headphones. Okay, so anything you're listening to with a pair of headphones right here. I have my headphones hooked in right here. And pretty much most all the time, I'm using headphones. So anything that I'm actually monitoring or listening back to, I do it mostly with headphones. So I don't really have to worry about the main so much. I can actually turn it all the way down. I can mute it even if I mute it, you probably couldn't hear me just now. So let's just test this. Test. Yeah, if my volume went out when I did that, that's because, and I did that for a reason, I'm sending also a sub channel. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. There's a main, and just below that there's a sub channel. Now the sub channel has its own output up here. Okay, and you can sub out any of these tracks. So there's a sub underneath all these tracks here. Now, if you wanted to sub out your stereo mix, which is coming from the PC, which I am right now, I'm actually subbing out my stereo mix back into OBS. Okay, and I have from FL Studios, the audio is going to FL Studios. It's getting then sub back out into OBS. Now, this is also very, very handy. If you can't see that, well, you probably can't read it either, but just take my word for it. There's a sub channel in between the main and the PFL. This allows you to sub any of these channels down to your own very own mix. And this is important, especially if you wanted to do like a live show with somebody, because let's say you're monitoring somebody, you know, you obviously don't want to send your monitor back out to your friend who then gets a double of like his voice or a constant delay or echo effect or like a feedback. So you can choose which channels you want to send back out. Now, if you're in a live environment, it's even easier. So for instance, I just want to send my microphone out to, you know, my pal or whatever. I would just sub out my microphone, and everything else here is just on its own. So for instance, even my computer, even my PC return, because I made an actual physical PC return on 19 and 20, I can listen to anything going on my computer on just this track if I wanted to. Now, if I sent that out to my pal, obviously he's going to hear himself and it's going to create distortion. It'll probably create a really loud buzz or hum or something like that. It'll probably kill your ears. This, I could choose not to send that and just send my microphone, or let's say my synthesizer, or let's say something over here. And then you could basically mix down your whole studio to just a sub out. So that way you're talking to the other guy on the other end. Now that's the easiest, the most simplest way to do it. You know, if you just wanted to jump right into it and just be done with it. But if you want to have like studio effects, if you want to run it through your DAW, if you want to like, you know, add different effects and stuff, then there's a few more processes or a few more steps that are involved. And if you want, you can check out the last Tascam tutorial that I made. It's actually one that I did ahead of time. It tells you exactly how to set it up in your DAW. So that way this, which is already kind of overwhelming, well, just imagine inside your DAW, it's even more overwhelming. There's a lot more testing and things you have to do in order to get something to work through there. Now, as of now, Tascam claims that you can just go to your USB settings or your audio settings and choose the USB mixer in the settings as your input and your output, which would basically take all your inputs as a stereo channel. That would just be all your, you know, obviously your inputs, and then your outputs would be totally separate. But as of now, as far as I know, it just for some reason doesn't function, but that's a whole nother story. Check that video out if you want to find out how to do it. It's very interesting. So, but basically, and I know I say that a lot, because you want to think of this as basic as you possibly can. Otherwise, it's daunting, it's very scary, and it's overwhelming. So, yeah, and especially if you know nothing about the stuff, you definitely don't want to damage a $1,200 mixer, which I think you can get them for like around $1,000 on sale. So, yeah, if you can get the deal, which I got it for $9.99, it's a great deal. For what you get here, it's absolutely mind-blowing. So the last one I didn't mention is PFL, which means pre-fade listen. Now, I don't ever mess with this. It's just something that I don't necessarily need or use. It's probably something used for more of like a live environment. Far as I know, it's kind of like if I'm guessing right, it's kind of like a solo button or something like that. So if you wanted to like hear a track on its own before you send it or something, I think, while everything else I think still gets maybe sent out to the I don't know. I mean, even if I put it on, I don't really know exactly how or what to use it for. But I do know that if you do have PFL or AFL enabled, there is a little red LED that lights up here to let you know, because some people might think their mixer's broken and all they had was a PFL or something enabled, and it was just, there's a little thing that tells you right there. Because, yeah, if you do this, I don't know, you might not be able to hear what I'm saying if I do that, but yeah. So these three main controls, and the top ones are pretty much your main ones for like using a DAW or something like that. And the rest of this is all just kind of for live, and that's kind of like the breakdown of how it all works. Now, of course, all your outputs here, if you like messing with inputs and outputs, you can kind of figure out what all that it does on its own and, make up your own story with that. But those are essentially like the basics of like everything on this mixer. And if you don't know what an Xlr cable looks like, it's a three-pin cable that would just pop right into the top up here. Yeah, I'm kind of covering it, but it would go into one of these inputs just like that, and then this one would go out to like your microphone or whatever. And they're typically mostly just used for microphones. Now, this mixer actually has a master out that's XLR, because monitors, like stereo monitors for like your studio, typically would have XLR on the back of them for the most part of it. So if you have a good high quality, and they're typically used for high quality audio, that's pretty much the main reason why you have XLR cables. They're excellent for powering a microphone, powering certain things. Now, when you're using them as like a monitor or something, though, you may require additional power for like a PA system or something like that. It's either self-powered or it's like a passive speaker that requires an amplifier. So that can also be an extra step into that. So just keep in mind this board, if you do want to use the main feed or the main out here. Now you can just use control room, the blue cables there, which control room would just go into like any stereo pair of like speakers or whatever. I wouldn't recommend it so much. It just makes more sense to have a main control or just use the headphones in a sense. But it has XLR outs. So if you have, for instance, speakers that have 1/4 inch in the back of them, you'd have to get a cable that can dumb down an XLR to like a quarter cable TRS mono 1/4 inch jack or whatever you call it. And this is all like, trial and error, things that you have to just figure out for yourself. Don't be afraid, just kind of jump into it and figure it out, and I'm sure you'll figure it out on your own. It took me a while though, so just keep in mind that learning this stuff, it took me like 1.5 years just to get the basics of like this Tascam mixer down. And that's without taking any kind of like lessons or any kind of like, professional advice on it. So it's one of those things you kind of have to like work on over time. So that's essential, especially with any kind of any kind of program or any kind of like piece of hardware or any kind of instrument. It's definitely essential to like figure out things, slowly, first. Not necessary that you have to figure it out all at once. But all right, so now we're in the mixer, okay, on FL Studios, and this is just the way I have it set up. It doesn't necessarily reflect what you got, nor does it reflect what your DAW might look like or whatever. But just to make sense here, just ignore this PC audio one here. This PC audio, just ignore that for now, because the PC audio, it's just being routed back to OBS. Okay, so when you are officially setting up your equipment, whether it be your microphone, which is right here is Electro RE320, Electro Voice, you want to make sure that you have the correct input. Okay, so if you want to go to, I'll just show you how it's all set up from the beginning. When you go into your audio preferences, hold on. If you go in your audio preferences, you'll see that you have MIDI, audio, general, blah, blah, blah. They're all kind of relatively the same. The device that you're looking for, because there's many of them, okay? There's direct sounds. This is like some of the inputs that I have, which is primary sound driver, speakers, which this is actually a built-on audio on the actual motherboard. And I think I disabled it though. It actually does have speakers model 24, and it does show that there, but it needs to be an ASIO device. So you would want to come down here and you want to look for a model mixer ASIO. That's the one I normally use. Typically this is going to take full like resource or whatever. It's going to dedicate all of its resources to FL Studios. So typically in this manner, if I were to like go on YouTube or something, and play like something like on YouTube, it probably won't play that audio because I'm in FL Studios right now. All my audio is now being forced through FL Studios. So now what Tascam says, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but if you look here, it shows you the 44.1, it's like, I don't know, 44,000. It shows you details here. It shows you the hertz. It shows you the inputs, the outputs, the latency. It shows you the, some impedance plugins. So anyway, and then essentially it'll show you your milliseconds and delay or whatever, depending on what you have it set it to. Typically people will use 44. 48, it's, you could use that too. Some people might have a problem with it depending on whether the computer can handle it or not. But 4,400 or 44,000, would be probably the one to use in most situations. And you do have the option using 16 or 24 bit. It's like it's like an additional, like how much more detail you want to pick up. So 4,400 and I think 24 bit or something like that is typically like standard. That's like the highest quality. You could literally like record anything and it'll sound amazing, so that's your sample rate. So what they say on Tascam on their manual is that if you have anything playing through Windows that runs at the exact same sample rate, audio will come through. So whether it be if you're on like iTunes or Windows Media Player or YouTube, supposedly, I haven't tested it, but they say that if you're running your sample rate exactly the same on any device throughout your computer or whatever, that it should also play together. In this case, I haven't tested, nor I was really interested in doing it, because I actually have my PC audio coming in right here. And so anytime that I want to monitor something that's happening on my PC, because I have a direct input into my mixer on 19 and 20, I can then unmute this, and then I can like listen to anything that I want to coming through anything through my computer, because I have a built-in sound card. I have a built-in Sound Blaster XFI sound card, which supposedly helps take a lot of the load off the CPU. So hopefully it's doing some processing too, and it's, adding additional, power to whatever I'm doing here, if that's true or not. But essentially that's what I do. And it's always good to have a live input that's monitoring that stuff too. So you can then, mix and match and send things back to the computer. I even have an input on my sound card that then I use for sending audio back to anybody that's on my computer. It's just all about trying to figure out how all this stuff works, like I said. But as long as you have all this set here, it shows all your details here. Then you can go into your mixer in FL Studios, and then you can tap into anything that you want. So for instance, I'll just go to a whole new input. We'll just get away from there. All right, 19. So this is input, or I guess you could say it's track 19 in FL Studios. But if I wanted to, I can make it any track on my mixer. And you can even split your stereo channels into mono channels. So you have actually 24 mono channels, or like I said, you have stereo channels too. So, and you can actually take like 3 and 4, which are specifically just, mono channels, and you can pair them into a stereo if you want. It's totally up to you. So if you wanted to, you can like add another microphone or something. But these are all your inputs. Everything on here is an input. So the track 1 on the mixer, track 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 24. Or like I said, and the stereo that's actually built into your mixer, I believe starts on 13 and 14. So 13 and 14 are actually your true stereo mix. But you can make your own, you can make any of these into a stereo or whatever. So this is where you would select your input. And I don't know if it'll let me do this, but if I could select my RE320 again. It probably sounds funny. I could just mute it though. You can see that I added an RE, the microphone there. So I added the input 10. So there's all your inputs there. Now you can actually send them back out too. So if you choose, you can stereo these out or just have them on none, because typically when it's on none, automatically, if you see where the cursor is, it sends everything back to the master track anyway. So if you kind of get the idea there. Everything's being sent out to the master track anyway, unless you want it to be on its like own dedicated out. And then of course, I don't know, you can timestamp it and all that stuff. I don't really use any of that, but that's just to show you how to add any kind of instrument that you want. And of course, depending on like what you're doing, you also want to, be careful that you're not double monitoring yourself on any of the inputs and outputs. So like I said, when you're running everything from your mixer, make sure you're in the PC mode. So that way you're not double monitoring live and you're monitoring in FL Studios too. So that'll just kind of add strange kind of like effects on its own. If you think about it, it kind of sounds like you hear to yourself, or you might have a delay or something, depending on your latency that you're getting from your microphone to your mixer to your computer and all that. So that's also a key thing to kind of keep in mind. And then of course, if you wanted to go even deeper into talking about inputs about your, your sound options down here. you can then further go into even more options. So if I drag this up, I know you can see the OBS there, but if you drag this up, then you have full control over like every sound option on your computer, if this is big enough. Let's see here. Yeah, you can see all your playback devices. You can see, let me see here, Model 24. All right. And then you can then go into, the properties of it and stuff. You can check the levels. You can check, your quality, your 20. Right now, I guess the actual mixer's running at 4,800 hertz, 24-bit. So that could be one of the reasons why maybe certain audio doesn't show up properly, because maybe it's not set specifically to FL Studios. But FL Studios has like its own configuration. So. All right, so let's see. There was a little bit of a hiccup there, but anyway, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap this up here. So yeah, I just wanted to show you all these different things in the video and also audio format. So if there's any other details you want to know about, just leave a comment or something, and we'll see if we'll go that direction and stuff. But that's the overview over the Tascam Model 24. And like I said, it's got a whole lot of features, to be honest. Lots and lots of things to discover and lots of things to, take in and stuff. And it could be a lot to handle. So if it fits your, whatever you're looking for, then like I said, I definitely highly recommend this product. So without that, we'll just leave you out with the, we'll play you out. And we'll see you next time on Live in Space.